Treasury for 15 years. I was there. We've asked for cost benefit analysis for every single policy. This is one policy they didn't do a cost benefit analysis for. And so I later on did the CBA through with Gigi Foster. But the government backtracked on every single known principle of governance in Australia. So I've been in this country for more than 20 years, and we've been really at the top of the world in terms of our regulatory performance. We're really good at that. But this time we did nothing of the sort. We just panicked, and the politicians would not listen to anybody else. Matthew Guy didn't listen. He blocked me. Dan Andrews said, no, this is just his opinion. So there I am. I'm fighting the battle.
And before we continue, let me just say I'm saddened to hear of the passing of your father, Sanjeev. I hope you're doing well. One of the first questions I have is, why do you think Matthew Guy blocked you?
Matthew Guy is, I think, typical of the Liberals, really. So the Liberals, as you noticed from the very beginning, it was Scott Morrison. So the leader of the entire lockdowns in Australia is Scott Morrison. If you think about what's happened, right from the very beginning, he's been out there, claiming this is on the 18th of March. He put out a press release, a big press statement, claiming this is a bigger thing than, almost like the Spanish flu, once in 100 years, etc. And so we need to do all these things. And he's been out on the front foot demanding lockdowns and saying there'll be draconian, the word he's used, there will be draconian measures needed. So this is where the whole thing started. It started with the Liberals. So let's be very clear on that. And if anybody has any questions, I can answer them. I've got all the documentation. It's on my website, in my book, and other places. So Matthew Guy, like any other Liberal, has been following his own leaders, right? So he's not got the spunk or the guts or the courage or even character, whatever you call it, to be the Liberal that he's supposed to be. And so what did I ask him? I asked him, can you please raise this question in Parliament, right? And what is this? This is something he should have asked on his own. Why was I asking this? Why was he not asking? He signed off on the lockdowns. See the state, state of emergency and all these things. He signed up on all these. And so the question is, and by the way, LDP did that as well. The first time around, it was all signed off by all these guys. So now the question is, why did they not ask for proofs? Why did they not demand a cost benefit analysis? Why did they not want transparency of the fundamental decisions in this regard? Because their leader, Scott Morrison, and by the way, Josh Frydenberg was very much on the front foot as well on this, saying this is a huge thing, once in 100 years pandemic and so on. I've got their documented statements in my website if you're interested. So the Liberals were running the show, and Matthew Guy, I think, was at that time not the opposition leader. He was just my representative, local leader. It was Michael O'Brien who was the Liberal leader. But as the local representative, he did not show any courage to raise the question. So why? I think the answer is that these Liberal people are just like the followers in a Nazi army. Once the boss says you do this way, they don't raise their voice. They don't question it. They just follow because they think that's politically important. And by the way, here's something that some of you might or might not know, that Scott Morrison, the ratings on the polls just before the lockdowns started in Australia, it was the lowest in the last 15 years for any prime minister. He was collapsing in the ratings, okay, because of this. Remember there's a bushfire issue and other things and so on. He was completely decimated politically. And guess what happened? From the moment he announced the lockdowns and draconian measures, his rating went up to 80%. 80%. So politically, this was the greatest boon for Scott Morrison, to be seen as a guy who's draconian and who's demanding all these, closures and border closures. He was saying, I've shut down Australia. I'm the great hero. So when that was politically very, powerful and very helpful to these guys, there was no possibility of anyone raising questions about this. But the problem is, it's not just then. What about later, when Matthew Guy became the local leader? Why? And what about now? Why is he, not even bringing that issue in the elections? The only issue is brought in. You might be surprised. The big issue for which he's also spamming everybody, including my mobile phone, is this $2 policy, public transport policy. Can you believe the Liberals saying, we will give you a $2 ticket? Okay. Now, he doesn't know, or he should know, that already there's a $30 subsidy per ticket in Victoria. About $30 is paid by taxpayers for every time anybody travels by bus or public transport. Now he's going to raise that to practically the whole amount. And so the question is, can the $2 even recover the cost of managing the Mikey system and other things? And I suspect not. So why not simply make it free if that's the plan? But the point is that's completely socialist. So what he's banking upon is socialism to take him and outflank Dan Andrews from the left. And the other one he talks about is that, this is going to be great for the roads and for the climate change, because people are going to start, using public transport, fewer cars and so on. So he's outflanking the Greens. So the liberal leader is outflanking the Labour and the Greens from the left. That's his agenda today. He doesn't talk about lockdowns. He doesn't talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, which I thought he should hammer this guy completely and thoroughly. Even if he ignores all the lockdowns, he should hammer this guy on Belt and Road Initiative. That's the agreement with China that Victoria signed with Dan Andrews as a leader. And so that was finally, brought back and removed because of the liberals at the national level. And that is a good thing. But the question is, why doesn't this guy, Matthew Guy, hammer Dan Andrews on that issue? So Matthew Guy is the most feeble leader. I don't think he's going to win, but he'll win my seat, of course. There's no doubt that, this is a regular liberal heart-built kind of a seat, so it's always the liberals that win. And I've got virtually no chance. But so Matthew Guy will probably get elected easily, but the liberals probably won't, given the trends of what's going on. And he's not capable of being a liberal leader. So there we are.
Based on what you've said, do you think it's the politicians' fault, or do you think it's our fault, the people? You did mention that their ratings went up when they were bringing in some of these laws. Yeah. So are these politicians just doing what they think we want, we the people want? Are we the problem?
Indeed, that is probably the fundamental issue here. So above everything else is the foundational issue for Australia and for the rest of the West, actually, except Sweden, which is very well managed. And I'll come to that separately this time. But for most parts of the world, what happened was that there was a massive scare campaign started by China. You might have seen those videos, which are like floating around on the internet in January and early February. And they were talking about people falling out on the streets and dying and this and that. And all sort of stuff was being pumped out in a very systematic manner. Then there were the stories about people hoarding toilet paper in Hong Kong and so on. So people started doing the same thing here, a little bit of them, a few of them. It's when the Imperial College report came out, which again, by the way, Imperial College has got very strong connections with CCP China. They're very heavily funded by China. Now, when the report came out, I think on the 15th of March, saying that there'll be massacre in England and so on, and then it was widely relayed all over the world. All the newspapers picked it up, made it headline news. The people had been primed by those videos from China that this is a very big deal. By the way, when this thing started, people were completely relaxed in Australia. Okay, very, very relaxed when this news started coming in. They thought it's some kind of a distant thing and they wouldn't bother. But the way this thing was built up, the mind of the people, that by the 15th of March, I think the demand for lockdowns in Australia became a crescendo from the people. So politicians could not face the demands. They must have been getting 10 phone calls per day. All the Michael O'Brien or Scott Morrison, getting phone calls from their constituents and others saying, shut down this whole place. We're going to be killed and massacred by this massive virus. So at that stage, interesting things happened. And that's what I've written in my book. You might be aware, if you've read it, that Victoria's pandemic plan, official pandemic plan for COVID, was published on the 10th of March, 2020. And it is very good. It actually said we'll have a risk-based approach. It said clearly COVID is a pandemic of moderate severity. There's the language used. I think moderate. Yeah, moderate is the language used there. So it had all the good things out there. No, there's no question of lockdowns. If you read the thing, there's no possibility of lockdowns. So by the 10th of March, Australia and Victoria were following the standard practice of risk-based management of this whole thing, which would mean that people who are vulnerable or the elderly would be looked after more carefully, and the others would go on with their lives. And so it was basically the buildup of hysteria, and then it became mass hysteria. So it's one of the greatest episodes of mass madness or whatever in the history of the world. I call it the greatest of all. I say there's nothing ever been of this magnitude in the world, and it still continues. And I can see it on a daily basis in where I live. And so this hysteria, I call it the great hysteria. There's never been anything like this in the past, history of mankind. So The hysteria was overwhelming in my view. And of course, then the question is who started the hysteria and why and so on. And then, of course, I've got another theory on that, and I've published a lot on that. But leaving aside that, the question was, these politicians, they were flooded by demands. And then they found that the moment they did what the people wanted, they became enormously popular. Imagine if Scott Morrison had become, like Anders Tegnell saying, let's manage it sensibly, let's do all this thing. He would have been wiped out politically in 5 days. That was the situation at that stage. After the 15th of March, he was not in a political position to even hold his job, because somebody from the Liberals would have said, you can't do this, I'm a better guy than you, whatever, and they would have rolled him. Okay, so this is what I'm certain has happened. So the Liberals led from the top, and then he formed the national cabinet, where all these guys, collected together, all these maniacs like Dan Andrews and so on. So the net result was the country shifted in one moment from being a democratic country to being a fascist nation. It became an instantaneous shift. And I saw that within my own Treasury department, where in the past it was common practice for the secretary of the department to demand and to insist that there be a cost-benefit analysis of any public policy. But in this case, all that was thrown out of the window. And I asked this question, from my boss, what's going on? Why don't we have this cost-benefit analysis going on? Why are we doing this crazy thing? He simply said, in this case, it is the health department that we are deferring to. Well, the DTF, the Treasury Department, never, ever defers to any other department. You see, the system of government is actually a checks and balance system, right? If you know the Westminster model, it's the cabinet model. So at the cabinet, the treasurer brings an enormous amount of clout. And the treasurer's department, which is a massive department full of 100 economists and so on, is constantly demanding proofs of the various policies being thrown at us by these various departments. We call them line agencies. And so normally and always we demand proofs. But in this case, there was no such demand from the Treasury, and the Treasury buckled under the political pressure. So it's when we look back at this whole thing, there's going to be a lot of examination of the emails of the various people and other things. That's all under confidence. And then they also have now put a ban on the FOI, the document. The National Cabinet was protected, now has been protected under law. But I also was told that it might actually be not possible to get the information within the next 30 years, like a normal cabinet document. So they have sealed that information. But there's a lot of working documents. We call them working documents in the government. They are FOIable. Like my emails are FOIable. I've FOI'd them and I've got them and published them. But there are also lots of other emails which are FOIable. And that will actually tell us what was actually happening within the government, and who collapsed and who buckled. And why did we buckle? And so that's, but the ultimate point is everybody buckled to the great hysteria. It was basically the people of Australia and the world, everywhere, demanding to be shut down.
Do you think half the reason for that is because they essentially they saw the China model? You let out a few whispers, that this is working. And then from there, no one wants to be responsible for mass casualties, and so therefore they go, okay, we've just got to go for it. Because I think only really Rand Paul in the UK, US, and Australia was he was one of the main people who said, let's calm down, let's not lock everything down. By all means, no. By all means, protect yourself, especially while we're trying to figure out what's going on. But why were there so few Rand Pauls?
I think Rand Paul is not worried about his re-election. So that probably explains that. And plus, he's an honest man, which is another second part. And there were others like Kirsty Noem, etc., in the USA. And later on, the governor of Florida as well joined that and basically said, yep, you're right, I shouldn't have done all these things. So he had started lockdowns and so on. But I guess the issue was it's a combination of these. So the whole thing starts with China, as I said, right? And as you mentioned, so it was a steady build-up. But there's another part of the China story which is really important. So not only was the build-up to this whole thing, people collapsing, massive, spraying going on across China, etc., and then lockdowns and people being sealed inside their homes and everything else, and then they build this so-called hospital in 10 days or whatever. That's complete nonsense. That's complete fraud. But then China then pumped out towards the end of February, said, everything is under control. Everything is over. They showed images of empty hospitals to say everybody has left. We've cleared the whole thing. This lockdown has worked. So what they did is they created this mythology that first, it's a very massive virus, and second, that lockdown is a very quick solution. So if you go to the videos, you have the answer there actually, which is that China planted the whole hysteria. So who benefited from the hysteria? There's only one country that benefited, which China had the only country in the whole world that had positive GDP growth. I think mostly all of them collapsed was China. So there's one country that benefited. It also made the Western civilization very weak internally. So it has done what would be a perfect strategy of war to attack this enemy from within. And so I've got a lot of writings on that. I won't go into details there, but some people agree, some people don't. That's not the substantive issue. But the issue there is that they operated not through the politicians and so on. They operated through the WHO, which was completely owned by China because Tedros was appointed by China. And then they operated through the people. So they actually operated on group psychology. And this is one of the greatest psychological operations in the history of the universe. I think there's never been a thing of that superb effectiveness. So the people completely went off. And until today, 2.5 years later, in Victoria, even now, all around me are people who are wearing masks, who are, when it's not required, etc. They oppose me. I get messages saying, "What the hell are you doing? We don't want you," etc. We've been saved. Scott Morrison told us 30,000 people's lives have been saved, and so on and so forth. So there's basically a lot of propaganda which occurred. If you notice, after this whole thing, with the Imperial College taking the prime position, on the 15th of March as the precursor to the whole West collapsing, we now had essentially, a complete overriding of the Western, the checks and balances of the Western civilization. Politicians not able to do anything. And so China achieved its goal, and the people are still under, with the propaganda from the media, from chief health officers, or whatever. It's still going on. Even today, I'm reading, people saying on Twitter, a lot of people, health officials saying, time to mask up again, guys. It's happening. Some other, whatever variant. So yeah, it's basically led us to exactly a combination of 1984 and the Brave New World, which is what I've been talking about on a number of occasions. So we have the people willingly wanting to be terrorized. Okay, so the Brave New World was about people imbibing it internally, and 1984 was the Big Brother. So it's a combination of both, and it's a perfect nightmare for the West, because now I've come to the view that freedom, which I thought at one stage was a possibility for the world, is no longer a possibility in my view for maybe 1,000 years, and even maybe never, because of the failure of human nature, which is so colossal. And climate change is the other one. They've been testing this whole thing with climate change, by the way, in the past, and now they've mastered the propaganda tools. The people, by the way, the average person does not have the time. I don't blame the average person. They don't have the time to examine what's going on. Do they have the time and say the skills that I have to dig deep into the original data and to find out what's going on? They don't. So it's never going to happen. They'll never check what they've been told. They will believe anything that they're told. So that's propaganda. That's Nazi propaganda. Repeat the lie, big lie every day and people will believe it. So all the tools of propaganda were employed and are still being employed. So we have lost. The Western civilization has collapsed, essentially.
That's a massive statement, saying that it's probably not reversible for the next 1,000 years. If I believe Hitler had a quote like that. The Third Reich was the last 1,000 years.
Yes. But this is the opposite of that. This is basically saying the West has collapsed, and I don't see any scope for recovery anymore. Yeah.
Do you think a way that it might recover is because in the same way that, like, I know Dr. Edward Dutton, he talks about IQ sort of decreasing generation after generation. One of the things he doesn't believe that you could essentially have world domination achieved through technical means, because he believes that we'll end up being too stupid in order to maintain it. So do you really think it would actually last such a length of time?
Oh yeah. I think look, I've been doing some teaching work in this in the last few months, and I teach the fourth industrial revolution and whatnot, and
Mm.
artificial intelligence and all the technologies and singularity and so on. So I'm on top of all that stuff. So, and I've written a lot about robotics as well in the past. So I think I'm not worried about these things, harming us as humans, because yes, there will be all this, bio cards and IDs and other things which are almost going to restrict liberty completely. But I think people as a whole will continue to be humans in some form or shape. So it's not an IQ issue. It's probably more in the brave new world. They will be having this, they're basically mesmerized by Netflix and by this and that. They're constantly immersed into some alternative reality. And so, in a sense, they don't want to study and they don't want to know what politicians are doing. For them, a mask is nothing. So, for most people in Australia never traveled abroad during this period. They didn't want to travel cross borders. Only a few were affected. So they keep telling me, "What is it? This is only a mask, right?" So for most people, this has been a very gentle segue into the collapse of their own individual sovereignty. They do not see themselves as people capable of asking questions and so on. And that is the real issue here, which I'm alluding to. It's not the issue of technology taking over our existence. And yes, of course, there's going to be more technology. There's going to be a lot of all that stuff. But the surreptitious encroachment into our liberties by the technology, that's one thing which we can see today. I mean, none of this would have happened, the work from home, if it wasn't an option. And it wasn't, by the way, an option even 5 years ago. I can tell you that in the Treasury, we only got laptops for working from home. Everybody got them about 2 years ago. And you were expected to, potentially shift desks or go home, etc. Only 2 years ago. 5 years ago, this would never have happened. The technology has empowered the people who want to eliminate the Western civilization. And there's a lot of them out there. And, I won't go into details, but I think the whole thing is coming together. The so-called leftists have taken over the world. We know that very well. I know that very well in the academia. I think it's about 97% people in the USA are Democrats, the academicians. And so we've seen the takeover of the West within the academia, and I think in Australia as well over the last 50 years. Now, the big government guys, and they're talking of global government always. For them, there is only one answer. Everybody wants just one global treaty for every single thing, health or whatever. They just want one person, like the chief health officer of the world, rather than of Australia or Victoria. That person's order then percolates across the world instantly, and that's their dream, the wet dream or whatever. So the globalists who have benefited so much in terms of monetary benefits and other power, etc. Power is a very big elixir or whatever you call it, a drug of some sort, where not elixir, it's a drug. And so once you get the hang of power, you probably don't want to let go, which is what's happened to these guys. They've seen power emerging through the COVID crisis and also on a scale unprecedented. The World Health Organization's power was unbelievable. They want the same thing now for the climate change and so on. So there's going to be many reasons to encroach on our lives. But
we've talked a bit. Sorry to cut you off there. I was just going to say we've talked a bit more broadly about the whole world and most people in Australia, and how you were saying that a lot of people were getting caught up with the whole hysteria of it. But why, in particular, do you think Victoria has this reputation for being quite left-wing, for in particular really wanting some of these lockdowns? I mean, I think it was reported that at one point Melbourne was the most locked down place in the world. Why in particular do you think Victoria has been impacted so much by this kind of far left-wing hysteria?
Well, the first thing I would like to state at the outset is that it was not a Victorian thing. It was an international thing, that there was a demand for this all over the world. What did happen, though, was that Victoria, being a southern state, one of the more southern states, more inclined, let's say, to, and by the time, I think it was in June or something, the number of cases had been starting to increase here. So because the vitamin D deficiencies, I suppose, in this state relative to the northern states, that's my hypothesis, by the way, worth testing. There's got to be some biological reason why there were more COVID cases in Victoria. So the fact that there were more COVID cases became more problematic for politicians here. because there were not that many COVID cases once the border was shut down. Virtually very few cases in other northern states. So that led to the lockdowns. And each time they opened the lockdowns, the COVID cases would come back. And so they would again impose the lockdown. So that's why it became longer than other states. So I think there's a biological basis as well. But the overall hysteria was national, international to be precise. And at the same time, I think there was, in my view, proclivity or tendency for Dan Andrews, given his very strong socialist background in Labour Party and very close contacts with China. And, because he's, I think I was reading, he had somebody very closely related to China, in his inner circles. That kind of stuff probably made him more inclined to follow the big guys, like Chinese people. He sort of respects them more than he does our own system. So maybe that's why it became more easy for him to impose. But he also is a phenomenal speaker. He's a communicator par excellence. I mean, that's where he beats virtually any other politician in Australia. You should hear him speak. He is so hypnotically persuasive that was probably another thing. So, there's nothing in personal, particular about Victorians being more leftist or whatever. I think there is a little bit of that, possibly a little bit more multicultural, so a bit more inclined to be socialist or, Labour Party oriented. But they're not fundamentally that different from the rest of Australians. But what happened here is either both biological and I think attributable to Dan Andrews' personal, willingness to follow the lead of his bosses. We call him Chairman Dan, and so he's got a chairman out there in China whom he follows or whatever. So stuff like that, So there's a bit of incidental factors which will make Victoria, and of course the Liberal Party here has been absolutely spineless. There's nothing more spineless than the Liberal Party of Victoria. I think there's probably all over the country in Australia it's now finished. Virtually no Liberal parties anywhere in the country now, because the leaders that the Liberals are generating through their Young Liberals program obviously is not working. Something is wrong. These young Liberals who are coming in are indoctrinated by the climate agenda, by a lot of woke agenda, a lot of what are called hardcore socialist ideas. So they don't oppose big government fundamentally. So it looks like these younger people who are coming in into the Liberal Party have shifted incrementally as well to the left. So there is no real opposition in Victoria, which is why I then said we need a new Liberal Party for Australia. And I wrote about it and I said LDP will be the party. That's what it should be. And I started engaging with the party. Do they want to be the next Liberal Party for Australia? And it turns out they don't want to be. They were very narrow-minded. They're a hobby party. They just do some little upper house seats for the heck of it. They're not interested in anything to do with Australia's future. They're just a little academic scribes out there, twiddling around with their thumbs and saying, "Oh, it's too big an issue," etc. So that's not going to work. So they had to start a new party, Australia's representative, which failed, and so on. I'm an independent, but Australia does need a strong Liberal Party. Okay, that's what I've been even saying till the very end. Even last few weeks ago, I said on my social media that look, even though I'm completely sick and tired of what's been happening the last 2 years, the fact that Australia needs a Liberal Party cannot be escaped from. We do need to have a Liberal Party, a genuine party for freedom in this country. And so not these little fringe parties of UAPs and all these little things which have come out as a complete, sham. We need a genuine classical Liberal Party, which is right to the left of center, but not right to the right of center. What am I saying? Right to the right of center, bang to the right of center. I would rather say bang to the right, just close to the median voter. Okay, it should not escape too far to the right from the median voter. So I keep insisting, the median voter theorem, right? We do need to be elected. The political people do need to get elected. They have to be very close to the median voter. They need to change the mind of the median voter, but they need, in this case, to be to the right and not to the extreme right. So that's the LDP's position, a bit more extreme than it, maybe should be. But leaving that aside, we do need something out there, which was the center-right party, the Liberal Party, which Menzies had started, or at least that's what I think he had started. So that's a big gap. There's a vacuum out there. Victoria, as I mentioned, has a massive vacuum. Matthew Guy is definitely not liberal by any standards. Under no some circumstances is he a liberal. He's got not a single liberal hair on his on his body. And so he's come out with this $2 thing, $2 policy. Can you imagine trying to bribe the voter with a $2 policy? Where is it coming from? His pocket? Matthew Guy, you're my opponent. I'm actually opposing him in the seat of. And if he ever hears me, are you paying for this, Matthew Guy? If you are not paying for this, why are you asking taxpayers to pay for this thing? Okay, you are basically further harming Victoria, Matthew Guy. I'm assuming you're hearing me, but it doesn't matter. The voters are easily bought many times, and that's why the socialists are so successful. In India, it's another cases. They throw some money, basically taxpayers' money, at the voter. Voter buys in middle class welfare, and I won't go into details about who benefits from this. Very few poor will benefit, and I've explained that on my many other places. This policy will actually harm the poor. But leaving that aside, that's the kind of opposition we have, right? So we need a serious Liberal Party in Australia one day.
So based on that, you mentioned that quite a few of the minor parties were kind of hobby parties, that they weren't really serious, they weren't really competitive. And you're saying that we desperately need a strong opposition coming from the Liberal Party. So why not join the Liberal Party? Why run as an independent out of curiosity? Why not try and change it from the inside?
It's an impossibility, right? Because the other day, for example, on the 8th of December, 2020, so a lot of Liberal people connected with me right in the beginning, and I'm saying I'm happy to listen to you, but I gave them a few conditions. I said you need to start demanding accountability for all these lockdowns and things, and they would not do that. And so but I've been in touch with, including Matthew Guy. So there was a international conference to which I was invited. Tony Abbott was part of it, and Matthew Guy was part of it. And so we all spoke. And so and later on, I had a get together with these people. Not all of them had come, but there were about 5 or 6 Liberal Victorian MPs out there. And no, there is no inclination among these. They were very happy, thinking we're going to, we're doing a great job. They were only basically fighting about, who is going to be the leader. So that was the group that wanted Matthew Guy to be the leader. For them, that's the only thing that matters. It's just about little local politics about this whole thing. So they didn't have anything to offer me, and I sort of engaged with them first. So when I resigned, for about 4 months, I was in touch with the Liberal Party. They did not show me any interest, either in demanding accountability for what's happening, or doing the right thing, or even asking me. In fact, 1 or 2 did ask me, and I basically said, these are my requirements. Okay, I will join you, but you have to do these few things, which is simply asking you to do what you're supposed to do. There was no response, and of course, I wrote this article in the Australian newspaper on the 30th of December, which was widely shared within the Liberal Party, and people contacted me from within the Liberal Party saying this was being widely shared within the Liberal Party, ranks in Victoria. So the Liberal Party is really not up to speed. It doesn't cut it as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't have the Liberal DNA. It doesn't have it. It's not the kind of party we need.
Surely there'd be even one member who would say, well, maybe I won't get pre-selected next election, but I'm just going to do the right thing because the entire state is affected.
I'm not aware of all the details of what goes on in that party, but I can say from their performance with coming out with a $2 policy that they're desperate. They have no understanding of the actual voter who might have voted for them in the past, which is a Liberal voter and a conservative voter on many issues. So they don't understand their actual voters. And I don't know about what's happening inside, but from their it's a black box as far as I'm concerned. It's something I can't see, but I can see their actions. And I can see and everybody can see their actions. And you can point me to any single action in the last, whatever period of time. And I can go back even before this, by the way, to the previous government where the Liberals did come to power in Victoria for 4 years. And there was a leftist government as well. So Matthew Guy was the planning minister of Victoria, and he was one of the most leftist prime minister, ministers I've come across on the planning space, town planning space. So, on the policies, because I was looking after planning policy, I had a very direct interaction with his department, and virtually nothing would get through from his department from what we wanted in terms of good policy. So, now the Liberals of Victoria have never displayed liberalism since Jeff Kennett. Jeff Kennett was a genuine Liberal. But this time around, and by the way, he did speak very well a couple of times on television and a few other things, but he never rose to the occasion. And I don't know if they have anybody else left there in the party who can actually do what the Liberals should do.
In your opinion, I know you've mentioned that there's a serious disconnect between the Liberal Party leadership in Victoria and the constituents, the voters. Do you think there's also a disconnect between the party leadership and the actual party members themselves? What do you think?
Well, I do know that there are at least a few Liberal Party people who've been connecting with me in this little campaign of mine. And there are a few others who had left. So they were members of they were actual members of the party. But some of them have already left a few years ago, after early in the lockdown, and they've joined the LDP or some other thing. They've just simply others have left. I know this person, one person who joined the UAP, who was actually a senior person in the Queensland Liberal Party. So essentially, a lot of Liberal Party members who were active members in the party have left. Okay, and a lot of constituents obviously are very unhappy, but the constituents have nowhere to go except the so-called freedom parties, which are a sham, complete sham, and they're never going to cut the ice with me or with any voter. They're very poor quality. They don't have the talent. So Liberal Party does have talent in terms of sheer raw talent. If you think about what is the meaning of talent, a capable person, I think there's nothing to beat the Liberal Party. They have the Young Liberal program and other things. But what they're generating is actually ideologically or not intellectually, but ideologically a weak leadership team, which has forgotten its roots, let's say.
Do you think, because sort of one of my theories, my undergrad was in creative writing, do you think there's a primacy of secondary literacy? So secondary literacy is words and image, as opposed to primary literacy, which is words alone, in that you can comprehend a topic through words alone, and it's the primary form of engagement. Because now, obviously, this format is sort of words and image, but because there's such a primacy of, say, the interview, which can only go sort of surface level into certain topics. Do you think because there's that primacy, it's harder for young Liberal programs to produce the future leaders that are needed?
I really wouldn't say that. I don't even know what they do. I do know there was a Menzies Institute or something out here where I think there was some link with the Liberal Party, CIS obviously, and so on. So there are a few think tanks who will probably teach them. I really don't know how they get taught, the young Liberals, but I do know that the outcome is not good enough. So there's something missing. I mean, we had Tony Abbott, by the way, and he used to do wonderful writings. He's a great writer. And then this time around, he was not bad on the 8th of December in the interview that I had. The conference, international conference, which I participated in with Tony Abbott as well. He was not bad, but then again, he's back down and said this is a once in 100-year pandemic. I explained to him, and he himself said this is nowhere in that league. But then he backed off, and he came under political pressure. So there's a lot of group thing happening within the Liberal Party. There's a lack of self-belief. They completely lost. You can't have a better word than that. They're completely lost. They don't know where they're going and why they exist and so on. They need a complete so-called reset. I don't know how it's going to happen. Back to the basics kind of a program for them, whether it's going to be words, images, or conversations or whatever. But they don't get it. They don't get it that they've lost their moorings and they're no longer. I mean, I would never have dreamt of being in politics in Australia. Never even dreamt of it. Okay, till this whole thing happened, and I would have been a regular supporter of the Liberal Party without any doubt. Except I did in one case support the Labour Party because the Liberal Party of Victoria was so bad that I said, okay, I better have now my wife is really angry with that I did it. I don't really care, but the point is that the Liberal Party had started showing very poor quality from quite some years in Victoria. It's not just now. And for them to get back and to be the kind of party that maybe Jeff Kennett had led, or Tony Abbott. I'm sorry, John Howard was the classic. He's a great leader as far as I could see. Firmly rooted in liberalism, great communicator, great politician. That kind of leader is no longer there for some reason. And I don't know if Peter Dutton can come to that standard. I don't see any signs of that. So where do you get those guys to lead Australia back to where it should be? And so this This 1,000-year thing, by the way, is not linked only to Australia. It's about the global level of freedom in the world. So I care not just for Australia. I care for India, other countries, Middle East, etc. I was looking forward to freedom spreading across the world. And now I see it's virtually impossible because forces of totalitarianism are becoming so entrenched and powerful across the world that it's going to be very hard for liberty to fight back. But that's far more reason, again, if you think about it, for good liberal leaders to be out there talking about this whole thing, like, Ron Paul, for instance, and Rand Paul, and so on. And why doesn't Australia produce them at this stage is the question. I don't know.
Well, I suppose we'd go back to my point about because people focus more on secondary literacy, they don't go back to such sources that could produce a Ron Paul or a Rand Paul, and as such, you get a lot of mediocre leaders. You mentioned talent, but I'd say talent is what you repeatedly do, and because they don't repeatedly engage with primary sources, and with primary literacy, they engage with interviews. Not to put down interviews, we're in a room one right now, but because of that, we're not what we do.
Well, I would hope not, because I think as far as I'm concerned, the availability of this alternative medium of expression, understanding, etc., has improved my knowledge rather than reduced it. So it does mean, though, and I agree with you on one part, that I have less time on a given day to read the books that I want to read. Okay.
Yeah.
So to that extent, I do agree with you. I try to read some of the classics of liberty every now and then. I pick up one of them, and there are lots of them on my shelf and upstairs. And then the unfortunate part is I get bogged down with other things. Of course, this last 2 years has been very busy, but even otherwise, you're right. There is a bit of an extra pressure of other things happening, which reduce. So there's an opportunity cost, as they say in economics. And so maybe you're right out there that we have less time for really reading the classics of liberty, which is essential for anyone to be a master of if they want to be a leader, right? You can't be a leader simply by listening to a few interviews on YouTube or whatever. You have to imbibe the underlying logic, and that does take time and a lot of reading.
If I can switch sort of track a little bit, why do you think Daniel Andrews and Dominic Perrottet are so friendly together when their approach to politics is so different?
What is the question? That they're doing what together?
At least publicly, that they're very friendly together when their approach to politics is so different.
I really don't know much about this New South Wales politics. For me, the other states I've hardly had time to pay attention to them, so I couldn't really answer that question. I can only probably answer what I know about, which is Victoria and the national politics, and of course the international one, where I focused a lot on, and so on. So I really couldn't answer that question.
All right. Well, if I could ask one about the double standards in regards to in 2020, you had Black Lives Matter. While they had certain restrictions, they were allowed to protest.
Yes, of course.
However, when anti-lockdown protesters wanted to protest, it was very full on. Some of those images, it's extraordinary. It's either
Absolutely.
out of or not out of Australia.
They're not out there.
How did this double standard happen?
I think here I blame the chief of police in Victoria, just like I blame the secretary of our department in Treasury for backing off from the principles that they stand for and stood for the last whatever period of time. The police in Victoria have completely backed off from the independence, and so they are supposed to be completely independent of the government. That's why they're appointed the chief of police, and so they're supposed to look at the data. Like this question is the first question that they should ask. That we need to be consistent across the board with everybody. Why, one treatment to one particular group and the other one to another group? That's political. That means they're getting involved in politics, whereas the police is just supposed to be completely rule of law. You break the law, this is the punishment. End of the story, right? So, and the other point that I, by the way, mentioned to a lot of police people. I met a lot of police guys in this process in the last few years, and some of them came to my house, etc., to tell me, hey, don't start this massive movement or whatever. And I basically was saying, look, I'm going to, leave that aside. But the point is that these guys, I was telling them one thing: can you please ask the police to ask the question within the department, which they should, for proof of these laws, these orders. Where's the documentation, documented proof underpinning the chief health officer's orders? Because that's their obligation. They're supposed to be independent. You see, the whole point. That's why the second part of my book is called The Broken State. Why is it broken? Because all the checks and balances that we have built into the system with so much effort, independent regulators, independent police, the independent treasury, to advise the government, the cabinet system of government, which allows all the ministers to raise a voice, that completely broke down. So the answer to your question would be that the police are directly responsible for this whole thing. So the double standards would not exist, and they do exist in communist countries, in socialist countries, and totalitarian countries, and that's why they are in that state. But the fact that they exist in Victoria as well, and we have complete documented evidence of that, that's a clear sign of failure of our institutions. And that's not the only institution, but that's a fundamental institution. If you think about liberalism, what do you say? You want security and justice. The two things that failed, by the way, on a colossal scale were our justice system and our police system. So the justice system would not question the orders and dictates of the government. The Clive Palmer case, the Western Australian border case with the High Court case was a classic. It's just so terrible that they've accepted the opinions of these governments rather than question. Show me the proportionality. Show me that this is proportional. Never in the history of Australia have we shut down borders like this. Why have you done it here? So the fact that the government simply claims that this is unprecedented, blah, 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 the model says X, Y, Z, that's considered enough by the justice system, which is a complete failure, if you ask me, of our justice system. So our justice system and the police system collapsed, which is the rule of law, which is the foundation of liberty, which is why we became a totalitarian country and continue to be totalitarian till today. And that's why I'm in this business of fighting them.
If I could ask one question, just as a theoretically, how many people would it take to reverse the totalitarian state, theoretically? Because in terms of the goal that you're seeking,
I have been asking this question from many academics who are presumably much better, educated on these questions, and some of them are telling me the answer will lie in civil war and rebellion of this sort, and others are saying it may take decades, and there's really no consensus. And the question about so the people have been so badly brainwashed. The average person has been so badly brainwashed. They think this was the biggest thing since the Black Plague. They've been saved, and so they need these things, and they are willing to sign off on these as a routine. So now the thing that's happening, which is what the Biden administration is doing, is to make these responses natural. So it's, I think, 130 days of lockdowns in the USA the moment there's a pandemic, a suspected pandemic. Okay, that's going to be the law in USA that they're developing, and that will be supported by the people. Such laws are basically a foothold, a kind of way to enter into totalitarianism on a regular basis. So these are precedents that have been. So what this has done, the people have suddenly switched from being Democrats and demanding accountability from governments to being supporters of whatever the government demands of them. They're willing to do anything that's for compliance. The government says, do this. They say, okay, yeah. And so when that has happened on such a mass scale, what will happen? So the theory was that if there's an economic collapse because of these policies, that might lead to some unrest and potential rebellion. But I don't see that happening easily. So really, that's a very big question you asked, and I don't know if anybody has the answer. It's a hard one. We have basically lost our mind as a civilization, Western civilization. We no longer care. The average person doesn't care for concepts like liberty and democracy.
Do you think, at the very least, theoretically, even if these were people who were not going to get elected, just the exact number, if you were to say, you need 10,000 competent people. Okay, well then if you split it out, across the various states, you need 10,000 competent people to overturn totalitarianism in Australia. From there you can figure out, okay, well then how are they going to be educated and various things like that. Yeah. And then you can start out sort of building the framework, and then other people can forward it along. What's
happened is that that's why I say that these opposition freedom parties are a sham. is because instead of focusing on the fundamental, collapse of the Western civilization, the rule of law, and other things, 90 or 95% of them have focused only on one issue. And that issue is the vaccine, okay, for them. And by the way, I won't talk much about this because Facebook will simply shut this video down. Rather not talk about it. They're very good at shutting it down. So, but the real issue is that this cannot be done under the current circumstances, which reminds me, the big tech censorship is the other issue which we are facing. And so I can't speak my mind on fundamental issues in social media. The moment I speak it, I'm shut down, and my accounts have been, Twitter account has been banned, and this and that, and LinkedIn account finished, and I can't talk on Facebook, and of course many others have been shut down as well. So there are a lot of issues to debate and to discuss, but I think the people who are opposing the so-called freedom parties, etc., are nowhere in the ballpark of what they should be talking about. They're talking of different things rather than talking about the issues that I've raised. And there's sufficient number of people there. I believe that there's about 10 or 12% of the population who would support those alternative parties. But those parties are unable to lead Australia. So the problem is much more than the number of people, because they do exist. But the problem is essentially the people are not on the same wavelength. And that's, I think, a typical problem with these hysterias. We don't get common agreement on how to deal with them.
I am wary of the time as well. So one last question I did want to ask, since this is the Macquarie University Liberal Club, do you have any piece of advice for students that are more right-wing or centre-right? Because as you were saying before, it is true that academia is very largely dominated by left-wing leaning professors. So what advice would you give for people that are more right-wing on campus?
I would love that they do what I've done all my life, which is basically to read a hell of a lot, to understand human history, to understand the tyranny of the left, to develop their intellectual skills, whatever limited capacity I've got to communicate. I would like to do more of that. They should do more of that. The better the communicators they become. I look forward to young leaders like you leading us. See, because it is the 20s that people should rise into leadership positions, and that's the age when we need people with a strong voice to talk to Australians and tell them where they came from and where they should go, rather than accept what is now becoming essentially the control by one government and all these socialist ideas and totalitarian things in not just one issue like COVID, but climate changes. And the people have the other part I would encourage is critical thinking. So the thing that I feel that the one of the reasons why the Liberal Party has failed is because they have no critical thinking capacity. I would like the leaders themselves to be very capable analysts of data. So the data analysis is a very fundamental part of the whole exercise. So the reason why I oppose the climate hysteria is because I've gone into the data at great length, and similarly with COVID hysteria. So you need to be strong both in the theory, I think, in my view, but also in the data analysis, so that you are yourself able to ask questions and answer them rather than depend on somebody else. Because currently the position is economists who come out from the university, and a lot of them, they join the Treasury, I tell them that this data doesn't stack up for climate change. And they say, but the experts are telling us that. And that's completely, handing over your sovereignty or your ability to think to somebody else. Never ever depend on experts. I don't care for the experts because there's so many of them with so many different views. I really like to be the judge, assemble the data, look at the facts, and come to my own opinion. So there's got to be a lot of that happening. And of course, the capacity to communicate those ideas to the public. So it's a huge job. I mean, if the young people can do it, they would overturn my pessimistic estimates for the future of Western civilization or freedom in general. But we do need that. So yeah.
I might recommend to you an essay by Michel de Certeau called "Walking in the City." It only goes for 8 pages, but basically it talks about how you can build a concept city over the city that you're trying to run by denying all the tactical data that goes into the actual that goes to the actual true image of the city. You can constantly go around and say, "Oh, absolutely everything's fine," while negating certain aspects. Certain truths of what's happening on the ground. Basically, it talks about how you've got this dominance of the strategic view of the situation over the tactical view. Normally, if a map differs from the terrain, you trust the terrain. But here we're told, no, you must trust the map. The map is always right, even if the terrain says otherwise. So I might recommend that that essay to you.
Sure. Send over here.
Yeah, Sanjeev, Sabhlok, thank you so much for coming on. This was a fantastic interview. I don't know if you can see it. We've got someone trolling us in the comment section, but no, thank you so much for joining us on Sunday Sessions.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Rory, and thank you to the listeners and others.
Thank you very much. This has been a Macquarie University Liberal Club production. My name is Andrew Kremen. I've been joined by Rory O'Connor. We will see you again next week. Till then.